5 days ago, I discovered the entrance to an attic located below my cellar. There's someone whistling on the other side of it. Listen, I understand how that title sounds, but there's no typo. English is my first language, and I didn't miss any words. I couldn't present my current circumstances any more literally, and I've struggled with figuring out the best place to start. I suppose this is as good as any other, so bear with me. 5 days ago, I discovered an attic below my cellar. I grew up here, secluded on the top of a hill. No neighbors as far as the eye can see. On starless nights, I vividly remember this farmhouse casting a dim light across the surrounding woodland like the lone candle flickering atop a first birthday cake. Its 2 stories had more rooms than the 3 of us. My parents and I knew what to do with. The excessive space was the only extravagance, though. Otherwise, the house wasn't much more than a porch, a gabled roof, and a musty, unfurnished cellar with a bunch of empty rooms sandwiched in between. The property has been in my deadbeat of a father's family for generations. When he stepped out on us, ownership passed on to my mother. She died in her sleep 3 months ago, so now it's mine. All of which is to say, I've stepped over that space in the cellar hundreds of times over the course of my life, but I'd never seen that small wooden hatch until this week. Or, maybe more accurately, I'd never perceived it until this week. When I pulled the rope to open the hatch, finally at my wit's end with the whole of it, the constant whistling, the screeching violin, the ungodly angel, I couldn't comprehend what I was looking at. It took me a while to wrap my mind around the mechanics. Once it clicked, the magnitude of the impossible contradiction lit my spine on fire. Through the hatch, I saw the ceiling of an attic I didn't recognize. Although it was the middle of the night where I was, it was daytime in the room beneath me. I could tell by the pure blue sky and the sunlight streaming from the open window in one of its corners. I'm getting slightly ahead of myself, though. Life is such a maddeningly complex phenomenon, and yet your brain will try to convince you it's all relatively straightforward. What you see in front of you is what's there, full stop. No room for nuance, no space for intricacy. It is what it is. My dad, the self-proclaimed clairvoyant, taught me otherwise. He'd say things like, "Reality is a painting that spreads on forever, in every direction. Perception is the frame. Everyone and everything is born with a different frame. Some are bigger, some are smaller. Your experience in this life is only what lives in that frame. But don't let that mislead you. It's a grain of sand, not the whole beach." As much as I despised the man, I have to admit that he could dispense some wisdom when the mood suited him. Science has only progressed to prove him correct, as well. Take the mantis shrimp, for example. Unassuming little crustaceans that, somehow, could perceive 12 separate wavelengths of color, staggering in comparison to our measly 3, red, green, and blue. Their frame of perception captures a piece of reality distinct from our own, illustrating that just because we can't see those 9 additional colors, doesn't mean they aren't there. Maybe I wouldn't have spent my 20s homeless on the streets of Chicago if he stayed around long enough to impart his entire sagely portfolio, rather than just a few breadcrumbs here and there. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that he'd say all this one minute, acting like a paragon of philosophical thought, and then loudly complain that he was being stalked by biblically accurate angels the next. I have multiple memories of him telling my mother through urgent whispers that they were watching his every move. Balls of eyes like a pile of burning coals lurking in all the empty spaces of our home, staring at him with unclear intent. The man was unhinged. When my mother wasn't around, he'd ask me if I could see them as well. Told me that most of the men in our bloodline can massage the veil, whatever the fuck that means. He'd go on to explain that if I should happen to peer in between the layers of reality, I shouldn't be afraid, but I should be careful. Standing above me, his pupils wide and black like falling meteors in the night sky, he'd warn me of the so-called dangers. The more you look, the more you'll see. The more things that you can see, the more things that can see you back. I think I was 7 when he first said that. You don't know how to instill crippling anxiety in a child? Fear is so debilitating that it manifests as wild, unchecked alcoholism once it's given the opportunity? This is a great recipe. Until the hatch in the cellar, never saw a goddamn thing that shouldn't logically be there, despite my deeply ingrained fears. Heard some things, though. Somber, wordless lullabies from somewhere deep inside a broom closet, the pitch of the voice wavering abruptly between a little too high and a little too low. The notes of a pipe organ falling gently from my bedroom ceiling like raindrops. Lyrics sung to me by a child I couldn't see in a language I didn't understand. Naturally, I took my dad's advice, pretended like I couldn't hear the phantom noises. For the most part, he turned out to be right. That tactic kept a lid on things. Moving back into my childhood home was a mistake, but it was a steady roof over my head for the first time in years, and my mom needed the help. For the 6 months that I was taking care of her, the house was quiet. As soon as she passed, though, the ethereal clamor returned at a peak intensity. I had no more distractions, I guess. The night after the funeral, I was sitting on the porch, absorbed in a moment of bitter tranquility as I listened to the quiet chatter coming from the forest. I sipped warm decaffeinated coffee, doing my damnedest to avoid thinking about how much more comforting a tumbler of whiskey would be. The sound of a melody interrupted that internal conflict, cutting through the tuneless humming of insects. The noise was shrill, oddly familiar, and it wasn't coming from the wilderness. It was someone whistling, and they were behind me, projecting the melody from somewhere within the house. I sprang from my rocking chair to face the disembodied sound drifting through the open door. The act of me jumping up made a lot of noise, the feet of the chair creaking, the thump of my boots slamming against the floorboards. But the whistling didn't react. It didn't slow or stop. The melody kept on, eerily unfazed. As I stood in front of the doorway, terror galloped through me, shaking my body like the thrums of an earthquake. Eventually, adrenaline converted fear into anger, and anger always comes packaged with a bit of dumb courage. I grabbed a baseball bat from my mom's old truck and proceeded to do laps through the hallways of my childhood home with a teetering look of confidence. As I stomped from room to room, the melody ringing in my ears, salty tears unexpectedly welled up under my eyes. The airy refrain was just so familiar, but I still couldn't discern why it was familiar. Tracking the sound to its origin put me in front of the hatch for the first time. It wasn't more than a few steps from the bottom of the stairs. I rounded the corner, pulled the metal drawstring that turned on the cellar's dusty light bulb, and there it was. Positioned in the middle of the basement, an oaken trapdoor with a frayed rope attached, emitting the muffled whistling like it was a buried jukebox. In the blink of an eye, I felt my bravery evaporate, released in tandem with the copious sweat that was now dripping from every inch of my body. My mom needed supplemental oxygen in the last few months of her life, and this is where we kept the tanks, right over the space that the hatch now occupied. It had been nothing but dirt the day before. I stared at the closed passageway from the safety of the cellar landing, but I did not dare approach. Not that night, at least. Instead, I let the baseball bat fall limply from my hand, turned around, and walked back up the stairs. Numbed to the point of indifference, I continued up another flight of stairs to my bedroom, and I immediately crumbled onto my mattress. 5 days ago, utter exhaustion allowed rest to come easily. Since then, however, sleep has evaded me completely. The whistling wasn't some bizarre manifestation of grief that would vanish once I woke up, like I had hoped that first night. When my eyes fluttered open, it was still there, faint but consistent like the ticking of a grandfather clock. My boss at the nearby grocery store sounded worried when I called him, requesting to be placed back on the schedule for the week. Originally, I had taken bereavement leave through the end of the month. After the whistling started, though, I would have done anything to occupy myself outside the house. With $50 in my savings account, I had little options, and I was desperate not to find myself slapping those $50 against the surface of a bar top. Eventually, he relented. At first, time away from the incessant whistling helped. 3 days in, though, the melody turned out to be quite the earworm. It rang in my head like church bells, reverberating endlessly against acoustic bone, but never actually dissipating, no matter how much time I spent away from it. Yesterday, I was standing over the stovetop in my kitchen, forcing undercooked scrambled eggs down my throat as quickly as its muscles would allow me so I could leave for work. Retching from the revolting texture, I placed the ceramic plate down on the tile countertop with more power than I intended. As a result, a loud clatter exploded through the room. Briefly, I couldn't hear the whistling over the sound. When the plate stilled, the air had finally stilled too. Pure, unabated silence filled my ears, which caused a tremendous wave of relief to flood through my chest. From where I stood, the cellar door was directly behind me. Before I could really savor the relief, that door creaked open, the splintered wood present on the bottom dragging harshly against its frame. Reflexively, I spun around. The door was newly ajar, but nothing and no one was there. Heart-thumping and wide-eyed, I waited in the silence, trying to seduce thick air into my lungs as I watched for whatever had opened the door to finally appear. I stared at the space, breathless, and yet still nothing came. Until I blinked, that is. And then it was just there. When my eyelids opened, it had materialized in the entryway, motionless and grotesque beyond comprehension. A wheel of charcoal flesh, approximately 6 feet tall and 2 feet wide, held up by 3 hands protruding from its base. The wheel itself was littered with eyes. Thousands of frost-white, sickly-looking orbs of different sizes with no irises or pupils. Some blinked rapidly, inhumanly quick, like the shutter of a camera lens. Others stayed open, their focus placed solely on me with indecipherable intent. The hands grew out of a central stump, sprouting haphazardly from the wheel with no sense of design or forethought. They were like the rampaging tumors, expanding aimlessly while also fighting for space and control. The largest was in the back, supporting the fleshy construct with a half-crescent of muscular fingers. At least 30 in total, if not more. 2 smaller, weaker hands jutted out from the front. They were nearly twins, but the appendages had slight differences in their knuckle placement and their overall brawn. Unable to remain unblinking indefinitely, my eyes eventually closed. I instantly forced them back open, expecting that the wheel would have moved to bounce in the time I wasn't watching it. Instead, it had vanished. Or worse, it was still there, staring at me from 1,000 distinct vantages, but I simply wasn't perceiving it anymore. I tried to convince myself that I was just losing my mind. Hallucinations from a grief-stricken, maladapted, alcohol-deprived brain. The angel's departure left something behind, however, which confirmed to me its ungodly existence. When I stepped towards the cellar door, I noticed a trail of black ash that led down the stairs and across the dirt floor. Of course, I would later find that the trail ended right at the edge of the hatch. I bent over and rubbed some of it between my fingers. The ash was thin like soot, but it was inexplicably cold, to the point where it felt like I was developing frostbite. As I rinsed the dust off in the sink, my panic quickly rising from the biting pain, the whistling abruptly resumed, now accompanied by the harsh screeches of what sounded like a violin. Over the next day, sometimes the violin mirrored the melody, and sometimes it played the melody with a slight delay, lagging chaotically behind the whistle's reliable tempo. No matter what it did, the unseen instrument was brutally out of tune. The discord was like a cheese grater sliding against my brain, shredding flakes of my sanity off with every drag. I would wager I slept for no longer than an hour last night, restlessly watching for the return of the black wheel. As far as I could tell, though, it never came. When dawn spilled through my bedroom window, however, I noticed something that turned my blood into sleet. There was a silhouette made of the ash above my bed in the wheel's shape. No idea when it got there, or why I was just noticing it then. My eyes followed the ash as it curved along the wall, down onto the floor, under my locked bedroom door, eventually leading all the way back to the hatch. Maybe it crawled up here in the brief moments I was asleep. But I think the more likely explanation is that it lingered above my bed while I was still awake, present but imperceptible. Half a day later, I would cautiously push my head through the open hatch, seeing for myself what existence looked like on the other side. I'm not expecting you to understand why I didn't run. All I could say is, over time, the melody beckoned me through the threshold. 4 hours ago, I anchored myself to the cellar by a rope tied to my waist in the foot of a nearby water heater. Like I said at the top of this post, although night had fallen outside, it was the middle of the day in the attic when I pulled the hatch open. Oddly, the whistling had become fairly quiet, and the discordant violin had disappeared entirely. The notes of the whistling were clearer, but overall the melody was softer. Driven by a magnetism I couldn't possibly understand at that moment, I lowered my head and my shoulders into the passageway. The experience fucked up my internal equilibrium in ways that I can't find the right words to describe. I was putting my body down, but as my eyes peered over the attic floor, my head felt like it was going up. Fighting through pangs of practically existential nausea, I slowly continued to lower myself in. Collarbone deep, I could view most of the attic. To my surprise, there wasn't anything obviously otherworldly. The room itself was pretty barren, nothing but a desk and a sewing machine pushed against the wall opposite to me with a large window above it. I perked my ears, trying to localize the exact point of origin for the whistling. Before I could find it, however, a child unexpectedly walked by my head from behind me, causing a yelp to leap from my vocal cords. Instinctively, I pulled my body out of the hole. Anxiously kneeling next to the open hatch, I waited to hear some response to my outcry. A scream, a distress call to a nearby parent, something to indicate that I had been heard. Unexpectedly, all was quiet on the other side. There was some faint rustling of drawers, and the whistling continued, but otherwise both worlds were still. Now trembling, I once again lowered my head into the hatch. The child, who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, was sitting at the desk, kicking their legs and coloring. She looked normal. Certainly wasn't the black wheel of blinking flesh that had invaded my home the day before. Just find what the fuck is making the whistling, I reminded myself. In the cellar, I moved my knees around the perimeter of the hatch, which slowly spun my head around to the part of the attic I hadn't seen yet. When I turned, there was an old wardrobe and a few pieces of furniture covered by a dusty see-through tarp, but nothing more than that. Suddenly, I heard the squeak of the child pushing her chair out from her desk behind me. There was a pause, and then they called out in a voice 3 octaves too low for their size. Is anyone there? When I turned back, the child was facing me. They stared at me, but through me, as if they sensed my presence but didn't see my physical form. I failed to choke back a scream, but when it escaped my lips, they didn't react to it. Their facial texture was horribly distorted, uneven and bubbling from chin to hairline. Both eyes were on their right side, one on their forehead and one where their cheekbone should be. I could appreciate nearly the entire curve of the higher eye as it bulged outward, while the other eye was reciprocally sunken, showing only the tip of a pupil peeking out from the caving skin. Their mouth carved a diagonal line across the face, severing their visage into 2 equal triangular spaces. They asked again, slower, and somehow even deeper this time around, causing their face to practically bloom, revealing 2 petals of red, pulsating tissue as their diagonal maw spread wide. Is anyone there? All of a sudden, the whistling's volume became deafening, like it was being sung into my ear from a mere few inches away. At the same time, it was the clearest I'd heard it up until that point. In a moment of horrific realization, I remembered why I knew that godforsaken collection of notes. It was the lead melody from Etude Opus 2, No. 1, by Alexander Scriabin, my father's favorite piece of music, and it wasn't coming from anywhere around me. It was coming from above me. When I looked up, I saw the black wheel, hanging motionless from the rafters by its 3 hands like a sleeping bat. It was so close that my face nearly made contact with its flesh as I tilted my neck. In an explosion of movement, I wrenched my body out of the attic and slammed the hatch down to close the passageway. Through raspy breaths, I sprinted around the basement, pulling boxes and other items on top of the hatch. In less than a minute, there was a mound of random objects stacked on top of the obscene doorway. Feverishly, I inspected the barrier, but it still didn't feel like enough. Scanning the cellar for additional weight, I saw a particularly hefty trunk all the way on the other end of the room. When I darted over to grab it, I was yanked face first into the hard dirt, momentum halted by the rope that still connected my torso to the water heater. Moaning on the ground, my abdomen burned from the squeeze in my nose. No doubt broken from the fall, leaked warm blood down the back of my throat. The searing pains caused my mania to slow, and I sluggishly turned over onto my back to untie the rope from my waist. As I did, my eyes scanned the cellar. I couldn't see the black wheel around me, but I could still hear the whistling. It was distant, but it was still there. Not only that, but the notes, although faint, seemed to have a bit more energy to them. Like below the hatch, the wheel was excited, overjoyed even. Moments later, the melody ceased. I was skeptical at first, believing it was just another tiny intermission, but it went silent for hours. The hatch was still there too. And in the silence that followed, I feel like I finally understood the message that the whistling was attempting to deliver to me. Hey son, I'm down here. I may look a little different, but I'm still your father. Now, are you ready to join me? Decades ago, it seems that my father slipped through a break in reality and ended up somewhere else. Can't tell if that was a voluntary or involuntarily decision on his end, but I theorize he spent so much time out of his natural position that he began to undergo changes. Became one of those angels that only he could see from my childhood. The implication being that those angels were people from other places that somehow became stuck in our piece of existence, I guess. Unfortunately, I'm now able to perceive the hole my father disappeared down all those years ago. The optimistic side of me wants to believe the fracture is bound to my childhood home, so burning it down and having it cave in on itself may actually plug the cosmic leak. The pessimistic side of me, on the other hand, recognizes it probably isn't that simple, and that side has some new evidence to bolster their argument as well. It's just like my dad said, the more you look, the more you'll see. The more things that you can see, the more things that can see you back. As I'm sitting in my mom's truck with a canister of gasoline and a box of matches, typing this all up on my withered iPhone, I'm hearing things in the woods. In front of me, a deep, unearthly voice is humming a new lullaby from within the dark canopy. Behind me, from the black depths of my childhood home, I've begun to hear the whistling again. Minute by minute, both seem to only be getting closer. Is there any point in burning this place to the ground before I go? Or now that I can fully perceive the melodies and the wheel of blinking flesh that my father has become, is there any point in running at all? Where can you even hide from that sort of thing? I just don't know. But I guess I'll find out. And that was 5 days ago. I discovered the entrance to an attic located below my cellar. There's someone whistling on the other side of it, by UnalloyedSaintTrina. Unalloyed? You're not made of alloy, or you don't have alloys for you? I'm clearly missing a context here because I'm thinking of like metal, but I could be totally wrong. We're gonna move on from that. Sorry, I didn't really have anything clever to say. So this story is quite interesting, actually. I found it to be really good. There's a lot of really interesting descriptors in here, which kind of, especially some of them are a little bit fresher, which is quite nice. So they're not really things you might have heard before. Like I have to find the specific one that I really got a kick out of. Hang on, it's the one I liked the most was Terror Galloped Through Me. I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. I like that one. A great descriptor. So this story's interesting. This story's strange because I've discussed angels before on the Too Weird to Be True, the Christmas episodes that we were doing. Specifically, we had an actual episode talking about angels and the fact that there are different, not exactly. So the common misconception about angels is that they are these humanoid, representations with wings, right? That's what we always think of whenever somebody says angel. But there are different versions of angels as well, some which don't really look very normal. And the most important one that always gets brought up that people like to refer to is the biblical accurate representation of angels, which is more commonly known as the thrones type of angel. And they're the ones that are the rings with all the eyes and stuff like that, which is kind of what I thought this was going to be, based on some of the description. A little bit different, though, because this one has arms and no pupils. I mean, granted, some of the thrones don't have pupils, that's not that weird, but the arms part is strange, because some of the thrones have wings, but they don't really have any other limbs. They're just like rings, right? So I was like, well, that's kind of weird. That's really interesting, especially the charcoal color. I thought it was a really interesting kind of a creature. I also don't know what kind of noises or sounds they could make. I imagine they can speak in a way, probably like through a form of telepathy or something like that, because obviously they have to have a form of communication, even though they have their own language and all that jazz. The important thing, though, that I keep coming back to, though, is it immediately made me think of a few different things, especially the fact that I had, like, extra fingers, right? Which first immediately jumped into my head because I've been playing Elden Ring. The finger creeper monsters that have just, like, way too many fingers and they're a freaking nightmare to fight. Yeah, those guys are ugly as shit. So imagine one of those as part of the base for this thing, right? Like, really, really creepy, weird. So it started making me think of, like, Dungeons and Dragons creatures and stuff, which I didn't really do too much delving into that. But, it felt like it's something you would find in Dungeons and Dragons, for sure. But, I couldn't really get too much more info about what I thought this creature could be. It's clearly just I could be wrong, and I'm happy for somebody to correct me. It feels like it's, taken inspiration from certain places and kind of meshed together ideas that just create this new creature. I think it's great. I love this horrific monstrosity that does something that I find really, really interesting as well. Because, so for me, it leads credence to the idea of more than 3 dimensions that we're aware of. I mean, you can also include time as a dimension, but that's a different form of a dimension. It's not a spatial dimension, it's a time dimension. Which is why some people might say we live in 4 dimensions, which is understandable. But I'm talking about spatial dimensions specifically. And I know these theories, these concepts and stuff that get brought up. Yet again, not proven facts or anything like that. This is through a variety of different studies. But one of my favorites is Michio Kaku with his book Hyperspace. And in it, he talks about, we don't know exactly how many dimensions there could be. We believe maybe 10 is what a potential idea is. But yet again, even that's not, fully fleshed out or anything. But going through a lot of his hypotheses and his theories and everything are really, really interesting. And one of the most important parts I'm trying to relay to this is the fact that we cannot comprehend things above 3 spatial dimensions. So for all we know, we might be surrounded by things that are of higher dimensions, but we just cannot comprehend them, therefore we cannot see them, nor maybe even hear them or anything. Kind of like the child in this story, right? Even though the dude basically screams in the child's face, the child has zero awareness of his existence. Because, yet again, I don't know if it's because of dimensions, but that's just how I like to perceive this. It explains why things might only be perceived in certain ways and not fully picked up as well. A tesseract is a really interesting comparison when it comes to those kind of things. I really like that. Yet again, I don't know if that's exactly what's going on here because they lean more into the clairvoyant side of stuff, and I totally understand that. It's a world I don't really know so much about. So I won't comment on that aspect. I think it's a perfectly fine solution and answer to the story. I think that makes total sense. I really like the story. I really, really did, especially the fact that it's this whole other world, clearly, that is somehow attached to your house. And then it might also potentially be your dad? Question mark? Which, I have to admit, I don't think is confirmed, though. I didn't check through the comments or anything, but it's hypothesized in the story that it will be the father. But I don't think that could be true. I could be wrong. I don't know exactly what the story is trying to tell with that aspect. But whatever this creature is, it's, clearly beyond our current comprehension idea, right? Anyway, really great story. Really, really enjoyed the story because it just made you think about so many weird things and aspects. And so when it comes to what it made me think of, so I didn't have a perfect comparison that ever came to my mind, but one of the first ones that did was, funnily enough, the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The fact that, there's this secret space that they may not have been aware of, which takes them to a completely different world. That's the only true comparison of this that I can come up with off the top of my head. It's, yet again, not perfect. I suppose another one is anything to do with, portal capabilities, wormholes if you want. You could be talking Rick and Morty stuff, how you literally go through one thing and you're in a completely different place. Yeah, similar to with wormholes or the game Portal, another example. Maybe Doctor Who. Maybe there's a little bit of a comparison there because yet again, it's you look at this police box that's regular size on the outside, but you go inside and it's completely different. It's much bigger. Very tricky with its chameleon circuit because I'm a nerd. Let's see, what else? It also made me think of Silent Hill 4: The Room. I really, really love Silent Hill. It's a great series in my opinion. And I really like this one especially because it's about this guy. I'm not going to give too many spoilers, but it's about this guy who's essentially trapped in his own apartment. And we're talking chains on the door and everything. Literally, he didn't do any of this. He just woke up one day and it was like this. And he can't get out. He can see the outside world through his peephole, but he can't really look out windows or anything like that. He's not allowed for some weird reason. But he ends up finding this hole in the wall. And if he crawls through this hole in the wall, the thing is he doesn't go to, say, the next apartment over or a completely different building in the same town or something. No. He goes to a completely different world of Silent Hill, which is filled with monstrosities and horrors and stuff. And we can get into that shit sometime if you want to, if you don't know it like I do. But, just a fun comparison in my mind. It was... No, I found the story, it's strange, it's interesting. I would love more information. And I'd really like to know down in the comments below what this made you think of. Or maybe you have more answers than I do, in which case, please let me know some more information. Educate me on certain things, or just let me know what you thought about it and what it made you think of. I'd really like to know, especially if it's more things I can look into that I can absorb and enjoy. I think that'd be awesome. This has been it's been one hell of a story, and I've super enjoyed reading it, and I sure hope you enjoyed following along with me. This has been Nate at Night. I'll see you next time. Take care out there. Thank you to the YouTube and Patreon members who've been supporting this channel so far. This has been a fantastic effort. Thank you so much. I couldn't do any of this without your support, really. I really can't. Thank you. You can also show support through a donation at coffee.com/nateatnight, or whenever I'm live streaming through super chats of YouTube or through Twitch. And whenever you donate, I'll be sure to read your messages out on stream.